Mark Miller stood at the edge of the spacecraft, gazing out into the stars. He never thought his life would lead him to this moment. A diplomat, they had called him, though Mark had no experience in negotiation or galactic politics. The message had come from Earth's government, and he had been chosen for a mission he didn't fully understand. "Your mission is to represent humanity at the Galactic Council," his commander had explained. "You will be there to witness a special exchange between Earth and the Zharna. It's an important step for Earth's future." But that was all they told him. Mark had boarded the ship, leaving behind the comforts of Earth for what he thought would be a few weeks of awkward meetings with alien officials. He was not prepared for what he was about to face. As the spacecraft drifted toward the alien world, he had no idea what awaited him. Upon landing, Mark was greeted by a delegation of Zharna, an advanced species with skin that shimmered like polished stones and eyes that seemed to look right through him. Their leader, a tall figure named Jorath, greeted him warmly, or so it seemed. He spoke of peace and prosperity, but Mark could see something in his eyes. There was a hint of amusement, as though they were testing him, seeing how far they could push the human. "Human," Jorath said with a slight smile. "There is something we would like to present to you, a token of our friendship." Mark's curiosity piqued. He wasn't sure what kind of token they had in mind, but he braced himself. Moments later, a door opened and an alien woman stepped forward. Her skin was a pale shade of blue, and her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She stood tall, her presence commanding yet strangely reserved. "Her name is Lyra," Jorath said, his voice low and full of meaning. "She is an Earth bride, chosen to be married to you as a symbol of our alliance." Mark blinked, trying to understand. The word bride echoed in his mind. This was some kind of joke, wasn't it? He had to be misinterpreting the situation. The room seemed to blur for a moment as he processed what he had just heard. Lyra didn't seem as surprised as he was. In fact, she looked as if she had been through this before. Her eyes met Mark's and she gave a slight nod, though it didn't seem to hold any real warmth. The situation felt forced. Something had been planned and Mark had been chosen for reasons he didn't yet understand. "I'm sorry, but I don't," Mark began, but Jorath raised a hand, stopping him. "Think of it as a gesture," Jorath said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The Zharna do not understand the human concept of marriage, but we believe it will strengthen our bond. You will live with her, and your union will symbolize the unity between our people." Mark tried to gather his thoughts. "So, this is a joke? A diplomatic gesture?" Jorath's smile deepened, though it was hard to tell if he was amused or serious. "You could call it that, yes, a gesture of peace." He paused, then added, "We have no doubt that she will be an excellent companion for you." Lyra stood silently, her face unreadable. She didn't seem to care about the awkwardness of the situation. Mark could sense that she wasn't entirely comfortable, but there was a certain strength in her posture and unspoken resolve that hinted at a complexity beyond what he could understand. The entire room seemed to shift around Mark. The laughter, in the air, the way the Zharna exchanged looks. It all made him feel like the human in a world that was not his own. And now, this. "Lyra," Mark said, his voice unsure. "Are you okay with this?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes flashing briefly with something Mark couldn't place. Irritation, resignation. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Don't worry about me," she replied, her voice steady. "This is nothing. We both have our roles to play." Mark's mind raced. How was he supposed to handle this? Was this really happening? The joke bride was standing before him, a symbol of an alliance Mark didn't fully understand. He had come here as a witness to a galactic exchange, not to be thrust into something he had no control over. And yet here they were. Before Mark could say anything more, Jorath spoke again, his voice warm but firm. "Your quarters have been prepared, Mark. Lyra will accompany you there. Begin your union tomorrow. The galaxy is watching." Mark's heart sank. There was no way out. He could feel the eyes of the galaxy upon him, and he knew the Zharna weren't going to make this easy. The decision had already been made. Lyra stepped forward, her movements graceful and deliberate. She didn't look back at the others as she walked beside Mark. She was a woman of few words, and it seemed that their shared silence would be the only thing they had in common. Neither of them wanted to be here, but they were both stuck. As they left the room, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was at play than he had initially thought. The Zharna had no idea what they had set in motion. They thought this was just a game, a joke, but it was a joke that was about to change everything. Mark stood in the hallway, feeling the weight of the situation settling in. The Zharna had made their intentions clear. They were playing a game that Mark wasn't sure he wanted to be part of. Lyra, the alien woman who had been sent to him as a joke bride, walked beside him, her steps graceful, but her expression unreadable. He glanced over at her. Her blue skin shimmered slightly under the artificial lights of the alien ship. Her eyes, sharp and bright, looked ahead, never straying toward him. Mark couldn't help but notice the strange beauty she held, though it was a beauty that seemed distant, almost untouchable. It was clear that she wasn't here by choice, just as he wasn't. The silence between them stretched, and Mark felt awkward. He was a soldier, used to combat and command, but this was entirely new. He was supposed to be part of a diplomatic mission, but now it felt like he was being thrown into a game he didn't understand. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, and the alien guards opened it without a word. Mark stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. It was surprisingly simple. No lavish decorations or intimidating alien tech. The room looked more like a human guest room, with a large bed in the center and a desk near the window. "Your quarters." A voice came from behind them. It was one of the alien attendants who had been overseeing the exchange. "You will share this space for the duration of your stay." Mark turned back to the attendant, his mind racing. "Wait, we're supposed to share this room? There's no other place?" The attendant smiled, a gesture that Mark couldn't interpret. "Of course, it is customary for humans and their brides to share a living space. It builds trust." The attendant bowed and left the room, leaving Mark alone with Lyra. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, and the silence returned. Mark felt a sense of unease settle over him. He didn't know what to say or do. This wasn't supposed to happen. His role in this mission was to observe, to understand the aliens, not to marry one. But here he was, in a room with a woman who didn't seem to want anything to do with him. Lyra moved to the far side of the room and stood near the window, looking out at the stars. Mark watched her for a moment before clearing his throat, trying to break the silence. "So, do you want to talk about it?" Mark asked, his voice tentative. "About why you're here?" Lyra didn't turn to face him. Her posture remained straight and composed, like she had everything under control. "I don't want to talk about it," she replied quietly, her voice firm but calm. "And I don't think you do either." Mark sighed, feeling the awkwardness deepen. "Yeah, you're probably right." They both stood in the silence of the room, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. Mark glanced at Lyra again, trying to make sense of it all. She was beautiful, yes, but there was more to her than just that. She carried herself with an air of strength, as though she had been through things that Mark couldn't begin to understand. He couldn't help but feel a little sorry for her. The aliens had sent her here, not knowing or perhaps not caring what she might feel. Lyra finally turned her head, her piercing eyes locking with Mark's for a brief moment. "I'm not here to be your wife," she said, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "I'm here because I have no choice, just like you." Mark opened his mouth to respond, but he found he didn't have the words. He had been chosen for this mission because he was a human soldier, a representative of Earth. But this wasn't what he signed up for, and it wasn't what Lyra had signed up for either. He sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face in frustration. "I don't understand why they think this is a good idea," he muttered. "You're not some prize to be handed over like this." Lyra's expression softened for just a moment before she turned away again. "The Zharna think they can control everything. They play games with people's lives. You're just another piece on their board. I'm just another pawn. Mark looked at her, trying to understand. But we're not pawns. We're humans. Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she stepped to the window and gazed out into the endless expanse of space. It was clear to Mark that she was trying to distance herself from him, trying to keep her emotions in check. He stood up and walked over to her. I'm not here to hurt you, he said quietly. I know this situation is strange, but we don't have to be enemies. Lyra turned her head, her eyes cold but not unkind. Enemies? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I'm not your enemy, human. I'm just trying to survive, and so are you. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything more, the door to the room opened once again. A figure stood in the doorway, and Mark immediately recognized it as Jorath, the Sharna leader. He was smiling, his face full of that same quiet amusement. It is time, Jorath said, his voice smooth. The galaxy is waiting to see how you two begin this union. We will be watching. Mark felt his stomach churn. There was no escape. From this, no way out. The aliens were watching, and he knew that what happened next would be a moment in history. But it wasn't the kind of history he had imagined making. The day of the ceremony arrived with an air of awkward anticipation. Mark wasn't sure what to expect. He had imagined many things, but nothing like this. The Sharna were still watching, still observing, and the entire event felt like something out of a strange dream. Lyra stood beside him, her presence as commanding as it had been since their first meeting. Her calm exterior gave no hint of what she might be feeling, though Mark could sense the tension beneath her surface. She was not here because she wanted to be, and neither was he. As they stood together in front of the Galactic Council, Mark tried to focus. His mind was racing, his thoughts scattered in 1,000 directions. He wasn't prepared for this. He had expected to sit in meetings, listen to speeches, and gather information. But now, here he was, standing next to an alien woman who had been sent as a joke bride to a human soldier. The ceremony was short, formal, and anything but traditional. Mark tried to stay focused on his duty, but he couldn't help feeling like the entire room was watching them, judging them. The Sharna leader, Jorath, stood at the center of the room, his piercing gaze never leaving Mark. Lyra's eyes, however, were fixed ahead, her expression as unreadable as ever. She wore a simple but elegant garment, not too different from what humans might wear for a formal occasion. The fabric shimmered under the light, and her pale blue skin looked even more striking in the soft glow of the room. The ceremony began with Jorath's voice echoing in the grand hall. He spoke in an ancient Sharna dialect, which Mark couldn't fully understand, but the tone was unmistakable. It was official, it was ceremonial, and it was nothing short of strange. Today, two species unite, Jorath declared, his voice reverberating through the hall. A symbol of peace and cooperation, the human Mark and the Sharna, Lyra. Mark felt a chill run through him. Peace? Cooperation? Was this really what they were doing here? He had agreed to be part of the council's mission, but he never thought it would involve a mock marriage. The Sharna present in the room stood silently, watching with intense focus. Their alien faces showed no emotion, just a quiet expectation. Mark could feel their eyes on him, like they were waiting for him to make a mistake, or to somehow fail at this impossible task. Lyra, on the other hand, stood tall and proud. She didn't seem to care about the weight of the ceremony, or at least she didn't show it. She was the perfect picture of control, and Mark couldn't help but admire her strength. The ceremony continued, and Mark was instructed to repeat a few words in the Sharna language. He stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds, but Lyra did not react. She stood still, waiting for it to end. When it was his turn to speak, Mark didn't feel like he was making any promises. There was no emotion behind the words. He didn't even understand fully what he was saying. It was just a formality, a performance. Finally, it was time for the marriage to be sealed. Mark reached out, hesitating for a moment before taking Lyra's hand. It felt cold, alien, yet somehow firm. The touch was brief, but it felt like the weight of 1,000 eyes were upon them. The moment passed quickly, and Jorath smiled. The union is complete. Mark breathed a sigh of relief, but it didn't last long. This was only the beginning, and he knew the hard part was just starting. Once the ceremony was over, Mark and Lyra were led to their quarters. The Zharna didn't seem to care about what happened next. They had completed their task, and now it was up to Mark and Lyra to figure out what came after. Back in the room, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of confusion. This wasn't what he signed up for. There had been no warning, no explanation. He had been thrust into this situation without consent or preparation. It felt wrong, but there was nothing he could do about it now. Lyra, as always, was silent. She had given no hint of her feelings during the ceremony, and she didn't speak now. She simply walked to the far corner of the room and began to remove her formal clothing, revealing the more comfortable attire beneath. Mark couldn't help but watch her. She moved with grace, her every action purposeful and precise. But there was a sadness in the way she moved, an underlying weariness that Mark couldn't ignore. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice quiet. Lyra turned to face him, her expression unchanged. "Now we wait," she replied. "Now we continue living like this, just as the Zharna expect." Mark felt the weight of her words. "And what if we don't want to?" Lyra met his gaze. "It doesn't matter what we want," she said. "We are just pieces in their game." Mark sat down on the bed, feeling the reality of the situation, sinking in. Lyra was right. The Zharna had seen this as a joke, a game, but the consequences were real. The union, the ceremony, the expectations, it was all real. And now they had to figure out how to survive it. Days passed in a blur of awkward silence and quiet tension. Mark had grown used to the stillness between him and Lyra. They coexisted in the same space, but their interactions were few and far between. Mark would try to make small talk, but Lyra always seemed distant, as if her mind was far away. And perhaps it was. Despite the silence, something changed within Mark. He began to notice little things about Lyra, her subtle expressions, the way she would pause and listen when the humans on the ship spoke. There was a strength in her, a quiet resilience that Mark couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a part of some diplomatic arrangement. She was a person with her own thoughts, her own fears. And in a strange way, Mark felt that she was more like him than he had originally thought. One evening, as they sat in the quiet of their quarters, Mark caught a glimpse of something different in Lyra's eyes. For a moment, it wasn't the cold, distant gaze he had become accustomed to. It was something else, something soft, something vulnerable. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and Lyra turned her head away, as if trying to bury whatever emotion had surfaced. Mark didn't speak. He knew better than to press her. Instead, he let the silence stretch between them, feeling an odd sense of connection in the shared stillness. The next morning, Mark woke up to find Lyra sitting at the window, staring out at the stars. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes. It reminded him of the way she had looked when they first met, strong yet somehow broken. Mark felt the urge to speak, to ask her if she was okay, but something held him back. Before he could say anything, Lyra spoke first, her voice quiet but clear. "Mark," she said, her tone hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you." Mark turned to face her, his heart quickening. Was this the moment she would finally open up? He waited, trying to read her expression. "I didn't come here by choice," Lyra continued, her eyes still fixed on the stars. "The Zharna didn't send me here because I wanted to be your bride. They sent me here as a test." Mark's brow furrowed. "A test?" Lyra nodded, though she didn't meet his eyes. "They wanted to see how you would react, how a human would respond to such a situation. They didn't expect anything to come of it. They thought it would be easy, a game." Mark was silent for a moment, processing her words. It made sense. The whole situation had felt like a joke from the start, but he hadn't considered that it might have been more than that. He felt a wave of sympathy for Lyra. She had been forced into this role, just as much as he had. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Mark asked gently. Lyra turned to him, her gaze meeting his for the first time in days. "I couldn't," she replied softly. "I didn't want to show weakness. The Zharna see strength as the only valuable trait. To show them anything else is to be discarded." Mark didn't know what to say. He couldn't imagine being in her shoes, forced to play a part in a game that wasn't even hers to play. But at least now he understood her a little better. She wasn't just a pawn in a galactic game. She was a person with her own pain, her own struggles. There was a long pause, and then Lyra stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. Mark watched, her, unsure of what to do next. But before he could speak, Lyra suddenly staggered, grabbing the edge of the window for support. "Lyra?" Mark said, his voice filled with concern. He rushed to her side, instinctively reaching out to steady her. I don't feel well," she murmured, her face pale. Mark helped her to the bed, his heart pounding in his chest. "What's happening? Are you okay?" Lyra sat down, her breath shallow. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice strained. "I've been feeling strange, for days now, but I didn't want to say anything. I thought it would pass." Mark's mind raced. Could it be something physical? A reaction to the alien enviro? Comment? Or was it something else? "I think we need to see the ship's doctor," Mark said, trying to keep his voice calm. Lyra shook her head weakly. "No, I'll be fine. I just need some rest." But Mark didn't listen. He was already on, his feet heading for the door. He knew he couldn't let her go without proper care, especially if something was wrong. "I'm not taking no for an answer," he said firmly. "We're going to see the doctor. You don't have to go alone." Lyra didn't argue. She simply nodded, too tired to resist. Together, they walked down the hall to the medical bay, where a Zharna physician greeted them with a look of quiet concern. The doctor ran a series of scans on Lyra, and after a tense few moments, he turned to Mark, his expression unreadable. "Is something wrong?" Mark asked, his voice anxious. The doctor hesitated before speaking. "There is a complication," he said, his voice calm but serious. "Lyra is pregnant." Mark froze, his mind struggling to process the words. Pregnant? How could that be possible? Lyra had been sent here as a joke, a part of a diplomatic exchange. But now, it seemed, the joke had taken a turn no one expected. The news hit Mark like a storm. Pregnant. Lyra, the alien woman who had been sent to him as a joke bride, was carrying a child. But how? Mark couldn't understand how this was possible. Humans and Zharna weren't supposed to be able to reproduce together. The doctor's words rang in his mind, but the reality didn't seem to make sense. Lyra sat quietly on the examination table, her expression distant, but Mark could see the storm of emotions behind her eyes. She wasn't shocked like he was. In fact, she looked resigned, as though she had expected something like this to happen but didn't know how to explain it. The Zharna doctor had been careful with his words, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. This was a rare event, something that the Zharna had never anticipated. The doctor, in his professional demeanor, had assured them that the child would be safe for now, but the situation was far from normal. Mark took a deep breath. "Lyra, are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, though his heart was racing. Lyra didn't respond right away. She looked down at her hands, the soft blue skin almost glowing under the lights. She seemed lost in thought, her mind far away from the room. "I don't know," she finally said. "I didn't think it would happen. I didn't think anything would happen." Mark's mind was spinning. The pregnancy was not something anyone had prepared for. It changed everything. The Zharna, who had seen their union as nothing more than a joke, would now have to face the reality of what had occurred. There was no going back. He could see the conflict in Lyra's eyes, She wasn't just dealing with the physical reality of carrying a child, but the emotional toll it must have taken. She had been sent here to play a part, to be a symbol of something the Zharna didn't fully understand. And now she was caught in a situation that no one had expected. Mark walked over to her, his steps slow and deliberate. "We need to figure out what to do next. We can't keep this a secret." Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time Mark saw something that resembled fear in her gaze. "I know," she whispered. "But I can't go back to them. I can't go back to the Zharna. If they find out, they'll discard me. I don't belong to them anymore." Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. The thought of Lyra being discarded, of her being treated like an object, made him angry. She wasn't an object. She was a person with her own thoughts, her own feelings. "We don't have to go back to them," Mark said, his voice firm. "We can figure this out together." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "You don't know how the Zharna work. They don't forgive mistakes. And this is a mistake to them. I'll be nothing more than a failed experiment. A joke." Mark took her hand, his grip strong yet gentle. "I don't care about what they think. We'll make our own way. You're not alone in this, Lyra." Lyra's eyes softened at his words, but there was still a lingering sadness in her expression. She had been forced into this situation, and now she was trapped in a world that wasn't her own. The two of them sat there in silence for a moment, both trying to process the gravity of their situation. Mark knew they had to make a decision. They couldn't stay on the Zharna ship forever, and they couldn't hide what had happened. The pregnancy had changed everything. After what felt like hours, Mark stood up, his mind set on what needed to be done. "We need to go back to Earth," he said. "The Zharna may have their plans, but this is our life now. We have to take control of it." Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "But they'll never let us leave. The Zharna won't allow it." Mark shook his head. "Then we make them. If we have to fight, we fight. But we don't let them decide our future." Lyra remained silent, her face a mix of doubt and hope. She was scared. Mark could see it. But he could also see that she was starting to believe in what he was saying. She was starting to trust him. Mark knew the road ahead would be difficult. They would have to confront the Zharna and force them to see that their lives were their own to shape. But he also knew that they couldn't do it alone. They needed to work together, to trust each other, and to find a way to break free of the expectations that had been placed on them. The next few days were tense. Mark and Lyra kept to their quarters, avoiding the Zharna as much as possible. The alien race was still unaware of the pregnancy, but Mark knew it wouldn't stay a secret for long. They had to act quickly. The ship was vast, and Mark had no idea how to escape without drawing attention, but he was determined. For the first time since he had arrived on the alien ship, Mark felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't about diplomacy or peace treaties anymore. This was about freedom, the freedom to live their lives on their own terms. Mark turned to Lyra one evening after they had spent the day making plans. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice steady. "Together." Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes searching his face. For the first time since they had met, Mark saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it was there. And that was all Mark needed. Mark paced back and forth in their quarters, his mind racing with plans and possible outcomes. He had no clear idea how to escape the Zharna ship or how to convince them to let Lyra and him go, but he was determined. The child she was carrying was more than a symbol of peace. It was the start of something new, something that could change the fate of both humans and aliens. Mark couldn't just sit back and let the Zharna take control of their future. Lyra sat at the window looking out into the vastness of space. Her gaze was distant, as though lost in thought. Mark couldn't help but notice the sadness in her posture. She had been through so much, forced into a role she never wanted. Now she was pregnant with a child that neither of them had planned for, and the alien race that had sent her to Earth saw her as nothing more than a pawn in a game they didn't even understand. "Lyra," Mark said, breaking the silence. He turned to face her. "We can't stay here. We need to make a move before it's too late." Lyra didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were still focused on the stars outside, as though they held some kind of answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I know," she said quietly. "But where do we go? The Sharna will never let us leave. They won't. Accept this mistake." Mark walked over to her, his face filled with determination. "This isn't a mistake. This is our chance to change everything. I won't let them decide our fate." Lyra turned her head to look at him. "And if they don't let us leave, what will we do then?" Mark paused. He hadn't thought that far ahead. The truth was, he didn't know what would happen if the Jarna refused to let them go. But he knew that they couldn't give up. "Not now. We fight," Mark said, his voice unwavering. "We take control of our own lives. We're not their puppets, Lyra. We're human. And I believe we can make this work." Lyra didn't say anything, but her eyes softened for a moment. Mark could see that she was starting to believe him, starting to believe that they could change their situation. But just as quickly, the doubt returned to her face. "I want to believe you, Mark," she said quietly. "But I've seen how they operate. The Jarna won't just let us walk away. They don't forgive mistakes. They don't allow weakness." Mark's heart sank. She was right. The Jarna were powerful, and they didn't take kindly to defiance. But he couldn't give up on Lyra. He wouldn't. "We don't have to fight them alone," Mark said, trying to comfort her. "We'll find allies. There are humans on this ship who will stand with us. And if we have to, we'll go to Earth. We'll make sure they know the truth." Lyra looked at him, a hint of hope in her eyes. "You really believe that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded. "I believe in us. I believe in you." The words hung in the air for a moment, and then something unexpected happened. The door to their quarters opened, and an alien guard stepped inside. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Had they been discovered? Were the Sharna finally going to make their move? But to Mark's surprise, it wasn't a threat. It was Jorath, the Sharna leader, who had entered the room. He walked in calmly, his usual smile replaced with a serious expression. "I've been informed of the situation," Jorath said, his voice measured. "The news of the pregnancy has spread among our ranks." Mark's mind raced. This was it, the moment of truth. Would the Jarna allow them to leave, or would they make an example of them? Jorath looked at Lyra, his gaze softening just slightly. "The Jarna never expected this. It is a rare occurrence. A mix between our two species was never foreseen. But it has happened, and now we must face the consequences." Mark stood tall, ready for whatever came next. "What consequences? What do you want from us?" Jorath paused before speaking again, his eyes searching Mark's face. "We must acknowledge this as something significant. A new beginning, perhaps. But not everyone in our council agrees with your union." He looked at Lyra, then back at Mark. "Some believe you are a threat to our stability. Others think it's a mistake we must fix. But the truth is, we don't know what to do." Mark felt a wave of frustration rise within him. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about their lives, about Lyra's future and the future of the child she was carrying. "We're not going anywhere until we know what you're going to do with us," Mark said firmly. "This is bigger than your council. You can't just sweep this under the rug." Jorath looked at him, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. "You're right. And there is something else." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Jorath took a step closer, his voice lowering. "The child you carry, Lyra, it is not just a symbol of peace. It is a powerful thing. It has the potential to change everything. The Jarna have always believed that their power is unrivaled, but now, we are not so sure. Your child is a mix of two worlds. It is the beginning of something unknown." Lyra's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" Jorath looked directly at Mark. "I am saying that this child could unite your two worlds or tear them apart. The choice is yours." Mark felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The child wasn't just a result of a diplomatic gesture. It was something far greater, and the Zharna weren't sure whether to fear it or embrace it. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as Joreth's words echoed in his mind. The child was not just a symbol of peace. It was something more. Something powerful. A potential that neither he nor Lyra had fully understood until now. The weight of Joreth's words sank in, and Mark realized that this was no longer just about their escape from the Zharna. It was about the future of both their worlds. Lyra, standing beside him, was silent, her face a mixture of confusion and uncertainty. She had come to Earth as a joke, a token of peace, and now she found herself pregnant with a child that could change the course of intergalactic history. Mark could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear that had never fully left her since the beginning of their forced union. What do we do now? Lyra's voice was soft, barely above a whisper. How can we control something like this? We were never meant to be part of their game. Mark's mind raced. He knew that the situation had shifted. The stakes were higher now, and the Zharna were no longer just watching. They were involved. The future of the child was in their hands, and if they didn't make a move, the Council's influence might decide its fate. We take control, Mark said firmly. He turned to Lyra, his voice full of determination. We can't let them dictate our future. They might think they have power, but they don't understand what we're capable of. We have a chance to change everything. We have a chance to show them what it means to be human. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. She seemed to hesitate, torn between the fear of the unknown and the faint spark of hope that Mark had ignited. It was a lot to ask of her, and Mark knew it. She had been sent here against her will, forced into a situation she had never asked for. But the choice was now theirs, and they had to face it together. Mark, Lyra began, her voice trembling slightly. What if we fail? What if they turn on us? Mark reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. We won't fail, not as long as we stand together. The two of them stood there in silence, the weight of the galaxy on their shoulders. They had no clear path ahead, but they knew that they couldn't back down. The Zharna had underestimated humanity, and now it was time for them to see what humans were truly capable of. Just then, the door to their quarters opened, and Joreth stepped inside once more. His expression was still calm, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. He had been watching them, waiting to see how they would respond. I've spoken with the Council, Joreth said, his tone somber. The situation is complicated. Some members of the Council believe the child is a threat, while others see it as an opportunity for power. But I have made my stance clear. I believe the child represents a new future, a future where both our species can coexist. Mark's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment of truth. He had been ready for a fight, but now it seemed that Joreth was offering them a chance. A chance to control their destiny. The Council is divided, Joreth continued, and it is uncertain what the final decision will be. But I've seen the strength in both of you. I believe in what you're trying to do, Mark, and I believe that together, you can change things. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, a mix of suspicion and curiosity crossing her face. And what do you want in return? She asked, her voice low but sharp. Joreth's gaze met hers, and for a brief moment Mark saw something like respect in his eyes. I want to help you, Joreth said, his voice sincere. I don't believe in the Council's rigid rules. I believe that the Zharna must adapt, must evolve, and you, Lyra, have already proven that the impossible is possible. Mark felt a flicker of hope. Could this be real? Could Joreth truly be an ally, or was he playing a larger game? We need to leave this ship, Mark said, his voice resolute. We need to go back to Earth. The Council may be divided, but we can't stay here and wait for them to make a decision. We make our own path. Joreth nodded slowly. I understand, and I will help you. There are ships here, ships that can take you back to Earth. But there are others who will not agree with my decision. You must be prepared. Mark's mind raced as he considered their next steps. They couldn't stay in this limbo forever. The longer they stayed on the Sharna ship, the more likely it was that someone would find out about the pregnancy, and that could lead to disaster. But if they left, they would be facing an unknown future. "What about the child?" Lyra asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "What will happen to it?" Joreth's gaze softened. "The child is more than just a symbol. It is a bridge between our worlds. It will be the key to unlocking a new era of peace or war. It is up to you both to decide how it is used." Mark looked at Lyra, his heart swelling with a mixture of hope and fear. This child was their future, and it would be the foundation of something far bigger than either of them could fully understand. "We will make the right choice," Mark said quietly, squeezing Lyra's hand. "We have to." Joreth nodded once more. "I will arrange for your departure, but be cautious. The Sharna are not known for their mercy, and if they find out what you're planning, they may not let you go easily." As Joreth left, Mark and Lyra were left alone in their quarters, the weight of the decision before them. There was no going back. The future of their child, their lives, and the future of two species rested in their hands. And they had no choice but to move forward, to fight for what they believed in.